The Iranian regime does not want peace because the Iranian regime is an apocalyptic cult that is sworn to death to America and death to Israel. The Iranian people want peace, but they don't have much of a say at the moment because the last time they tried to raise their voices, they were brutally mown down by the regime on the streets of Tehran and the whole country. This is a regime that is sworn to impoverishing its own people and enslaving the entire region in order to export the revolution and its own fundamentalist ideology. The Iranian regime has been very clear. It will use this pause in order to rearm.
The Middle East is changing faster than it has in decades. Iran has been weakened, but is it defeated? Hamas says it's willing to step aside from governing Gaza, but will it give up its weapons? Hezbollah has suffered major blows, but is it finished? America remains Israel's closest ally, but can Israel count on that forever? And perhaps the biggest question of all, does the West still fundamentally misunderstand Israel's enemies? Joining us today for his third appearance on Stand Tall Israel is Eylon Levy, former spokesman for the State of Israel and host of the podcast Eylon the Record. Throughout the war, he became one of Israel's most recognizable voices, defending the country's position in interviews with major media outlets around the world and engaging directly with some of Israel's toughest critics. Eylon, welcome back to Stand Tall Israel.
Hello, happy to be here again.
Eylon, I want to start with Iran. I think many people in the U.S. expected this war to be short, that America and Israel would hit the Iranian regime hard, and then Iran would back down and the region would move on. But now we're seeing negotiations, pressure on Israel, questions about Hezbollah, Hamas, future of the region. Do you think that America underestimated or misunderstood what kind of regime it was dealing with?
This war against the Iranian regime was never going to be short if the goal was to end with a decisive outcome that eliminates the Iranian threat. This is a fundamentalist, fanatical, apocalyptic regime, and we have to take seriously what that means. It means we weren't going to hit them over the head for a few days and then they would surrender. The only way that this would end quickly is if the regime collapsed quickly. But that did not happen. And this war has now ended with the Iranian regime still armed, still dangerous. And what we see from the funeral of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, a whole week-long affair like an Indian wedding, is that they're still nursing dreams of revenge. And as we see the Iranian regime meeting behind the scenes with the leaders of Hamas, the Houthis, Hezbollah, conducting a whole supervillain summit on the sidelines of the funeral, they are very serious about plotting revenge against the West and continuing that aggression. And they have not given up their dreams of dominating the Middle East and destroying the state of Israel.
Now, do you think that Iran is ever looking for peace, or it's simply just buying time to rebuild?
The Iranian regime does not want peace because the Iranian regime is an apocalyptic cult that is sworn to death to America and death to Israel. The Iranian people want peace, but they don't have much of a say at the moment because the last time they tried to raise their voices, they were brutally mown down by the regime on the streets of Tehran and the whole country. This is a regime that is sworn to impoverishing its own people and enslaving the entire region in order to export the revolution and its own fundamentalist ideology. The Iranian regime has been very clear. It will use this pause in order to rearm. Just yesterday, the Iranian armed forces said they're rebuilding their military capacities. In violation of the MOU, they are continuing work at the underground illegal nuclear enrichment site at Pickaxe Mountain that they're building so far deep under a mountain that even America's B-2 bombers won't reach it. They're not disbanding the axis of resistance. They're meeting now on the sidelines of Khamenei's funeral with the leaders of that axis of resistance to try to rearm them. So the threat now is that if the US reaches a deal with the Iranian regime that addresses only one part of the triple threat, just the nuclear program, and puts temporary caps in the style of the Obama deal, that's just going to release billions of dollars for the regime to pour back into the proxy armies, back into the ballistic missiles, and back into threatening the entire Middle East, and ultimately making itself untouchable so it can pursue nuclear weapons and no one can stop it.
Do you think that negotiating with this regime is even a good idea to begin with? Meaning, is there such a thing as a good deal with this regime?
This regime is not negotiating in good faith. It is trying to blackmail the world by holding the world economy hostage. Under international law, it's very clear that the Strait of Hormuz has to remain open as a free international waterway. But they're now bullying ships to pass through the Iranian side, pay a toll to Iran, so that they can continue to milk money from the international community to rebuild their military. This is a regime that is determined to hold the whole global economy hostage, to hold all global consumers hostage in order to pursue their radical millenarian dreams. There is no rapprochement that can be reached with a regime that is leading crowds in chants of death to America on the streets of Iran right now. The best the United States can hope for is some sort of temporary pause that will have to lead to maximum pressure to bring down the regime by supporting dissident forces inside the country. But the idea that a regime that is sworn to death to America, whose leaders now are no moderates, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf has led the Iranian parliament in chants of death to America before. The idea that these are moderates and the regime is going to change its stripes is completely delusional.
Now let's move on to Hamas. Hamas now says it's dissolving its government in Gaza. Is this a real turning point or just political theater?
The Hamas regime in Gaza wants the Hezbollah model. And that means that it's free to focus on rebuilding its tunnels, rebuilding its rockets, while offloading responsibility for garbage collection to someone else. That is what Hezbollah did in southern Lebanon, and it built a state within a state that assembled a massive invasion force against Israel. The Hezbollah model in Gaza is the worst of all worlds. Hamas wants to remain the dominant armed force in Gaza. Hamas wants to remain with its monopoly on violence and force inside the Gaza Strip, and it doesn't want to go anywhere. And there now needs to be massive international pressure on Hamas to surrender its arms to the new interim government formed under the Board of Peace so that it is disarmed, demilitarized, and everyone can move on from the war it started on October 7th. But so far, we're seeing Hamas taking control of humanitarian aid, taking control of supplies, trying to rebuild their tunnel network, when everyone knows Gaza cannot be rebuilt until Hamas is destroyed. Because otherwise, instead of building houses above ground, all that concrete will go back into Hamas's tunnels underground and will be dragged back into the same war again. So this has to end not only with Hamas stepping down from power, but relinquishing its arms and demilitarizing Gaza so we can all move on.
So, what exactly does victory in Gaza mean today?
Victory in Gaza means the implementation of President Trump's Board of Peace plan, which has been endorsed by the UN Security Council. It means that Hamas must be disarmed, Gaza must be demilitarized, and the population must be de-radicalized. Now, that's a really important point that most people don't pay attention to, because when Hamas invaded on the morning of October 7th, it triggered celebrations in Gaza, frankly, around the world, but especially in Gaza. We had generations of people brought up in UN schools, the UN schools that produced the October 7th terrorists, who took part in the October 7th massacre, and people who celebrated that barbaric violence. Because Hamas, they're not aliens from outer space who landed in the Gaza Strip from nowhere. They're an authentic reflection of the Palestinian desire to destroy Israel from the river to the sea and establish a single Arab Islamic caliphate between the river and the sea called Palestine. And that ideology has to be tackled. That ideology must go away.
Has the conflict permanently changed the relationship between Israel and the U.S.? You often say that Israel and America have different risk tolerances. What does that mean?
Israel and the United States see reality differently because the United States is surrounded by the Pacific and the Atlantic, and Israel is surrounded by dangerous regimes and Iranian proxy armies. It means the United States can take some risk and gamble on a diplomatic process that may or may not work. And for Israel, that's much more dangerous because we cannot allow proxy armies to assemble on our borders ever again, because every day those proxy armies are on Israel's borders, it's a risk of another October 7th. Now, I think this war has done two things. On the one hand, it has proven Israel's indispensable role as a U.S. ally. There is a reason that the State Department, that the U.S. administration's national security strategy describes Israel as a model ally. There is a reason that CENTCOM and the Secretary of War said that Israel is a breath of fresh air fighting with such a capable ally, and other so-called allies should take notes. There is no other country that has fought so closely with the United States. At the same time, Hamas, Qatar, Turkey, Iran have been waging a very effective war of disinformation to radicalize Americans, to poison American public opinion in order to separate them from their best ally. They have been waging a war of disinformation and lies against Israel because they understand that together the United States and Israel are unbeatable. And if they want to fight us, they're going to have to fight us separately. And they've unfortunately succeeded in spreading that disinformation about Israel that has poisoned whole generations against what the US recognizes is its model ally. And that means that we have a situation now where, on the one hand, the alliance has never been stronger, but on the other hand, the political pressure to sabotage that alliance has also never been stronger. And it is bringing together voices on the far right and the far left that, unless challenged, are going to increasingly take over the mainstream Democratic Party, which I think they have, take over the mainstream Republican Party, where there's much more resistance, to try to separate America from its model ally and then threaten the security of both our countries.
Do you think that Israel could rely on America over the next, 5 to 10 years in the next administration? Should Israel voluntarily become less dependent on American military aid?
Israel is already putting in motion plans to reduce its dependence on American military aid, because we don't know who the next president is going to be. And unless it's Marco Rubio, they're almost certainly not going to be as friendly to Israel as President Trump. We already have strong political pressure to condition or end military aid to Israel in a way that could leave it vulnerable against its enemies. So Israel wants to move towards arms independence. And that means moving towards a relationship with the United States that is more about partnership than receiving aid. Now, look, let's remember, this aid is a subsidy to the American arms industry. Something like 90% of it is getting poured back into American manufacturers, creating American jobs, and the US gets a huge amount from it, if only because that technology is being battle tested inside Israel and saving it decades of research. But we're now going to move toward more of a partnership of joint research and development, joint manufacturing, rather than aid, because Israel has reached the unfortunate conclusion that the United States may not always be there for it because of the strong political pressure within the United States that has been created as a result of the very effective disinformation war against Israel.
Now, you mentioned the divide between J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio. They represent two different foreign policy visions. How is a view from Israel on these two different potential candidates?
Marco Rubio has been an outstanding Secretary of State who has understood the full gamut of threats from the Iranian regime, who has bravely led through a peace process between Israel and Lebanon that has led to a breakthrough framework agreement in which Lebanon recognized Israel's existence, committed to dismantling Hezbollah, allows Israel to create that buffer zone inside Lebanon until Hezbollah is dismantled. And the impression is that J.D. Vance represents the more isolationist wing of the Republican Party that wants to withdraw from areas around the world in a way that would endanger allies, but, out of a perception that that's what's good for America's security, instead of recognizing that America's security requires working closely with partners to keep that world safe for America. And definitely some of J.D. Vance's rhetoric about Israel has not been the kind of friendly rhetoric Israel is used to hearing from vice presidents and from the White House, and that's certainly causing a degree of alarm.
Now, we're seeing negotiation between Israel and the government of Lebanon, but how realistic is it for Lebanon to dismantle Hezbollah?
Lebanon has been completely useless at dismantling Hezbollah. And that's why Israel is saying, we're not going to fall for this trick again and withdraw from territory that will be taken over by an Iranian proxy army, that will be taken over by the IRGC. This is an agreement that tells Lebanon, we will give southern Lebanon back to a Lebanese government that is capable of maintaining a peaceful border. We're not going to give southern Lebanon back to Hezbollah, which means the IRGC. So the burden is on Lebanon now. If it can dismantle the Iranian proxy army that it promised to dismantle many times before, it will get the territory back and we will create a peaceful border that will be crossed by business people and tourists. If they can't crack down on Hezbollah, then Israel is not going to allow Hezbollah to get within walking distance of the villages that it planned to invade and attack October 7th style before Hamas's invasion. So we need to recognize Lebanon hasn't wanted to dismantle Hezbollah because it didn't want to get into a confrontation with a powerful Iranian armed militia. Hezbollah is part of the Lebanese government. Hezbollah has infiltrated the Lebanese military. Hezbollah still enjoys significant support inside Lebanon. But this framework agreement now says, well, that's Lebanon's problem now. Lebanon is going to have to get into that confrontation it didn't want to. So I hope we're going to see the world giving Lebanon the full backing to dismantle Hezbollah. What would be dangerous is if they try to insist on an Israeli withdrawal or concession because Iran is demanding it. The most dangerous thing for Lebanon now is to give the Iranian regime a veto, to allow the Iranian regime to act as the defender of Lebanon instead of having a direct peace process between the Israeli and Lebanese governments. So the burden now is on Lebanon, and the whole world is going to have to help it to shake off the Iranian regime, because God only knows the Iranian regime is going to do everything in its power to sabotage the Israeli-Lebanese peace process. It does not want to see Lebanon as a free, sovereign country at peace with Israel. It wants to see Lebanon as a forward base for proxy army attacks in order to advance the destruction of the state of Israel.
Now, how important is Hezbollah to the IRGC's plan? Meaning, some people might say that they're even more important than their nuclear program. Would you agree to that? How important are they?
Hezbollah is a central pillar of the Iranian regime's strategy to dominate the Middle East and ultimately destroy the state of Israel. The Hamas had a terrorist army of about 30,000 people on the eve of October 7th. Hezbollah had over 100, maybe 150,000. This was the size of a medium NATO army. The Iranian regime saw Lebanon as the jewel in the crown of its control of the Middle East. And that's why it poured billions and billions and billions of dollars in keeping Lebanon under the heel of this militia that answers to the IRGC. And the Iranian regime built that in order to protect its nuclear weapons program. It built these proxy armies so that Israel wouldn't be able to attack the nuclear program because it would feel afraid that all these proxy armies would attack it with missiles from every direction. But we know what happened in reality. Hamas jumped the gun on October 7th. Hezbollah didn't join the fighting for reasons that historians will continue debating. They've been picked off one by one, and the Iranian regime lost its essential defense to the nuclear program, which paved the way for Operation Rising Lion and Midnight Hammer last year.
Now, are the Abraham Accords stronger today than they were before October 7th? What are your thoughts on the current status of the Abraham Accords?
This war proved the importance of a defense alliance with Israel to the countries that made peace with it. Because Israel, according to reports, not only sent the Iron Dome system to the UAE, it even sent the Iron Beam, the laser system, to the United Arab Emirates to help them intercept Iranian threats. So as those countries look around and ask, who will help defend us against a vengeful Iran, they're seeing Israeli defense technology there. But the question of whether the Abraham Accords are enhanced or undermined depends on what kind of agreement the United States cuts with the Iranian regime. If this is a deal that allows it to impose tolls on the Strait of Hormuz, that allows it to pump billions of dollars of sanctions relief back into the proxy armies that attack the Middle East, back into the ballistic missiles, you're going to see countries hedging their bets and trying to play nice to the Iranian regime in order to appease them and keep them on side. If this ends with a deal that imposes total restrictions on the ballistic program, on the proxy armies, on the nuclear program, that keeps up sanctions on the Iranian regime, then other countries will feel more comfortable to move towards Israel. But that's not going to happen if they feel that the United States is just cutting its losses and leaving the Middle East.
Now, we saw that Iran attacked the Gulf countries. Do you think that the Gulf countries are more afraid of Iran today or more willing to stand against it? What are your thoughts on that?
The Gulf countries, I don't think, ever expected that the Iranian regime would attack them in such a crass and indiscriminate fashion as they did in this war. The regime fired more drones and missiles at the UAE than Israel. And it wasn't just military facilities, it was hotels and oil facilities and other civilian infrastructure. And they were shocked that the Iranian regime actually went there. And they know now that if the Iranian regime did it once, it could do it again. There was an extraordinary op ed in the Wall Street Journal by the UAE ambassador to the United States saying we don't want a ceasefire that leaves the Iranian threat in place. We need the full gamut of Iranian threats dealt with. Of course, Israel and the United States were fighting to eliminate those threats. The UAE, perhaps, according to reports, participated in maybe one sortie over Iran. But they're freaking out that the Iranian regime has no compunctions about using that military force against them and against their civilians. And they know that if they did it once, they could do it again.
Why do international institutions like the United Nations often seem so hostile to Israel? And what benefit does Israel have by staying there, by continuing to engage in dialogue with these countries that are so hostile to it?
The United Nations is not a club of friendly liberal democracies. The United Nations is a sum of its parts. And most countries around the world are not democracies. 1/4 of them belong to the Muslim world. Many more of them are within China's sphere of orbit and are helping to advance China's goals against the United States. The United Nations is a hostile organization that has been waging a vicious war of disinformation against Israel. You see it from the biased officials like Francesca Albanese. You see it from the commissions that twisted evidence, made up quotes in order to try to find Israel guilty of genocide or starving puppies or whatever it is they're accusing Israel of. It's something different every single day because they're not acting in the service of nice, enlightened, liberal democracies who, frankly, haven't been too friendly recently either. They're acting in the service of the hostile regimes that pay them. And Human Rights Watch recently had an eye-opening expose about the number of UN officials taking donations directly from China, directly from Qatar, directly from Saudi Arabia. And so when those are the countries paying the bills of the UN officials, it's hardly surprising that they continue to wage an anti-Western, anti-Israel, and anti-American agenda at the United Nations instead of trying to genuinely protect international peace and security.
I want to ask you one last question. What worries you most about Israel's future, or what gives you the greatest hope for the future of Israel?
The disinformation war against Israel has been lethally effective in convincing huge sections of the West that Israel is a genocidal, apartheid, baby-eating, evil country that deserves to be destroyed. And we risk seeing an erosion or collapse of support for Israel in the West. Now, that makes me concerned as an Israeli. It should make you concerned as an American as well, because the withdrawal of American and Western support for Israel would embolden the extremist Palestinian movements who want to destroy Israel from the river to the sea. And the collapse of the state of Israel would be the single biggest victory for political Islam since the fall of Constantinople in the 15th century. The collapse of Israel at the hands of the Iranian regime's terrorist armies, we came frighteningly close to it on October 7th, would be the single biggest boost to Islamic extremists and jihadists all over the world, who would then look to conquer their next target in Europe, around Africa, and ultimately in the United States as well. And I wish that people in the West understood how Israel is standing on the front lines with the finger in the dam, holding back that extremist Islam. And the attempts to separate Israel from the West through a campaign of lies risk weakening Israel in a way that opens the floodgates for jihadism to wash across the West And that's a threat not only to us, it's a threat to the entire world. And they have to understand where it's coming from in order to stop it in time.
Eylon, I want to thank you for your time. It's always a pleasure to get your perspective on everything that's going on in the region. And I hope to have you back again in the future.
Absolute pleasure. Promise we'll do it. Thank you.